Welcome back to Good Revenue. I'm your host, Neeta Bidwai. Today, we're going to do a look back at 6 months of great episodes. We've been really privileged to learn from some incredible guests. And so we put together a highlights reel of their top takeaways when it comes to the characteristics of a high performance company. We hope you enjoy the show. We're here today with a very accomplished and exciting guest, Carrie Holtz. Welcome, Carrie. You've worked with a lot of different types of teams. So another area of pattern recognition I'm curious about is around high performance companies, high performance teams. What do you think those types of organizations do differently, and what can we learn from them?
Thank you for that. Two of the organizations that I spent significant time with, majority of my careers was PricewaterhouseCoopers and AlixPartners, both who are global consulting firms, and highly selective in the talent that they hire and develop, and special cultures. So that's one of them. One thing that high performance, and then a bunch of my clients, and I learned a lot from them. So exceptional culture is an important one. And what that looks like, there's great communications. They're listening. Leaders are really listening to their folks, to their people, to their direct reports, as well as to their juniors. Those employees feel heard, understood, and comfortable sharing knowledge. There's also a culture of inclusion and belonging. They feel that regardless of their differences, they're respected, and those differences are embraced. And how that shows up is inviting them to the conversations, respecting, embracing different points of view. And that put me back to the initial point of feeling heard and understood and being comfortable. And even if the outcome is different, they had a part in that process and hopefully brought along on that journey. And the other piece, there's so much more to all of this, but the other piece of culture that I think is really critical is that there's really clear values. The company or organization has clear values, a clear mission, there's a clear vision. It may change, but that's articulated. So that drives connection, that drives alignment like we talked about, and it really results in efficiencies to our outcomes. Another thing that I think high-performing companies do well.
Oh, it really resonates with me. I think you're right. I feel like inclusiveness has become a little bit of a buzzword. I really believe in it. I think people are appreciative on every level when they really believe that they belong in an organization. And one of the words I heard you say that really resonates with me is respect, which isn't a word I think we talk enough about. But I do think, again, that people want to feel valued, not that you say you have values. You see me as a human and a professional, hopefully a competent one. And I think everyone wants that. So I think that really resonates.
A good part of my career, particularly when I was a consultant, was you couldn't voice a different point of view. Or you were shamed or looked upon. Not all companies do this or do it well. But the good companies, those that really have performing and exceptional cultures, embrace those different points of view.
Do you think that these apply to organizations at any size or scale?
I'd like to see it apply. I can't think of a situation where it wouldn't. Another thing that really high-performing companies do, and again, this is perhaps not in any particular order, but they invest in their people. And they share knowledge and they make that a priority, both company-wide and individually. That can look a lot of different ways. It actually provides those companies that are best at it offer a lot of variety based on what works best for the individual. I think it's really important. Yes, you learn a lot on the job. The majority of learning happens in your role if you're being appropriately stretched. I'm not thinking about companies where you're just running on a assembly line. I'm thinking about more consulting firms, high-performing organizations. They're really supportive of networking. They're providing very informative data and metrics to help manage the results so you know what's working well and what's not. And they're investing in all levels of talent, not just their top talent. And that kind of goes hand in hand along with that whole spirit of continuous improvement. So these high-performing companies it's okay to make a mistake as long as we learn from it. It comes back to what went well, what would have been even better. No, perfection does not exist. Opportunity to really embrace failures, to learn, to improve, to celebrate what went well, recognize people's accomplishment. think about ways that things could be even better, which include how can we further drill down into our data and provide analytics so we have a real good pulse around what's going well. And then the last thing is they really treat all of their employees like owners of the business. People feel like they're an owner. They're incentivized to think. And ideally, if they can have some or an ESOP, an equity stock ownership plan, where they can have some ownership in the business, really makes a big difference. People will bring their back. It'll incentivize to really think like an owner and get a high return, long-term success.
I think this is an incredible list. These are really thoughtful components that any executive should include. We're here today with Cassie Yoon. She is a longtime operator, most recently served as the chief commercial officer and then the chief customer officer before joining Primary Ventures. What do you think that high performance companies do better than the run of the mill?
They're completely aligned. Alignment, I think, is critical. We talked about it in terms of the first team thinking, the on the business thinking, but I like to think about it in terms of even your compensation incentives would be aligned.
Agreed.
Right? I went through this journey when I was at Sailthrough where we transitioned from a founding CEO into a multiple time sort of experienced CEO. Neil Lafferty, who's been a great mentor for me. And Neil beat into my head the importance of aligned incentives at every level in the organization, but particularly the executive level. And put a finer point on this to make it really tactical for people. So if you have an executive bonus plan, let's call it a 30% bonus plan for everyone. Everyone has the exact same metrics, right? So at Sailthrough, we have 3 metrics that we use. One was exit ARR of the business, because that encompassed both new logo growth and retaining the existing business. Number 2 was a net promoter score target, because we were clawing our way out of some debt in that category. And number 3 was a cash-oriented target for a while, and it became an EBITDA-oriented target as we started to get more focused on Rule of 40. You will see behavioral change in an organization when your head of product has their executive bonus tied to things like net promoter score, new logos, or the business things. And so I'm picking on a tactical hack for how to get there, but hands down, great organizations have supreme alignment and drives performance.
We are here today with a great guest. Eddie Yoon is a celebrated author, strategist, and a category designer. He's the author of Super Consumers, a simple, speedy, and sustainable path to superior growth. What do you think high performance companies do differently from the run of the mill? You've had an incredible vantage point to see a lot of different firms. So what is your take on that?
The best high performance companies I've seen, they're missionaries, not mercenaries. Generally what I found is that mercenaries can win in the near term, but they don't win in the long run. My old friends at Anheuser, one of the things I always talk about is before they lost their way, after they were acquired by the Brazilians and everything went financial, they had an incredible run in the 80s to the mid 2000s where they went from 25 share to 48 share. August Bush III, who ran them, was very much a command and control guy. But what was fascinating was everywhere you went in their headquarters in St. Louis, there was a sign that said, making friends is our business. They understood at a very fundamental level that they're in business to make money and grow. But part of the reason why people nowadays make fun of Bud Light or Budweiser for being not craft beer or just bad quality beer was that it was the common denominator that everybody could drink it together. There was some aspect of socialization and commonality, and they would give the executives wham walking around money, and they would like, hey, go to a bar or a restaurant and you see somebody drinking a non-energy project, buy them a beer.
Love that.
Just see what happens with no expectation, right? The best businesses, they are high performance. They want to compete. They want to win, but they are driven by a very clear purpose that ties directly to the business. The ones that have clarity around the mission and purpose of the company and why what they do beyond their P&L and balance sheet is a fundamental good in and of itself. They sustain and weather the bumps along the road, and they create the most value in the long run. It's the ones who are very clearly, everyone for themselves. We're here to screw over the customer before they can screw us over or each other or whatever. Like those are the ones that may be a flash in the pan, but they don't last because the purpose isn't there. There's a little bit of this when the mission matches the founder and the executives, matches the employees, and matches ultimately the super consumer, great thing can happen.
We're here today with Mike Heilmann. He's the head of revenue operations, most recently in Demandbase, and before that at Strongview. I'm just curious, is there anything else that you think high performance companies do differently from the rest of the pack? You've got a lot of great answers. I think you probably include in that bucket. Anything else?
Don't be afraid of having those fierce conversations, challenging assumptions. Innovation is always important. There are no sacred cows. Things always have to be blown up. Ideas always have to be challenged. Everything always continuously has to get better. That applies to resourcing too. See, you got to be pretty rigid too. End of the day, it's not personal. There's going to be people that step in that door successful and people that are going to struggle. Holding on to struggling people, you got to have good guidelines on how to best manage resources and make sure that if you do have people in the seat, they're the right people in the seat. They've proven to be effective.
We're here today with Brandt. She's a scale-up revenue leader at organizations like AppsFlyer, Sitecore, and Experian. She has built and scaled high-performance sales teams and revenue strategies across both public and private companies. What do you think that high-performance companies do that is different from the average or from the run-of-the-mill?
I'll point to the topic of culture. I read an article recently by McKinsey, which talked about organizational health and how that's a strong predictor of value creation and competitive advantage for organizations in a sustained way. And what really resonated with me was this idea of this generational shift in the type of leaders that are effective in healthy organizations right now. It's the change from unilateral decision-making or decision-making in sort of closed doors to empowerment, but also decisiveness, right? So it doesn't mean we don't make decisions, but we also decentralize decision-making, right? We use technology to do that and give employees the agency to perform their jobs. This has translations to how we show up for work, and we're a byproduct of the pandemic era. And I think that really resonates. And I think that's really one of the things that makes high-performing organizations successful, because it also feeds into culture. It's culture additive, it's culture supportive, empowering your people, but also delivering the right healthy metrics for business are a great combination. And it drives the right outcomes, I think.
We're here today with Michael Frankel, founder and managing partner of Trajectory Capital. In addition to having a really rich and interesting career in M&A, he's done more than 100 M&A deals, which I think is incredible. What do you think high performance companies do differently from the run of the mill?
In particular with M&A, I would say professional corporate development talent. Corporate development is a specific skill. It's no different than marketing or HR. So having pro corporate development, number one. Number two, deep alignment between corporate development and strategy. Those two things are hammer and nail. And so even if they don't report to the same person, they need to be tightly integrated. When you're in a deal, diligence, integration, and negotiation have to be aligned. This idea that diligence comes first and then integration comes afterwards is crazy to me. And this is especially true for big corporates, recognizing the need to have the execution capabilities to capture synergies. As a corporate development officer, it is super easy for me to model synergies. I put them into an Excel spreadsheet, the numbers look better, everything turns black from red. The reality is actually making those synergies come true is a huge amount of work. There's the classic McKinsey study about how, this is now 30 years old, 70% of M&A transactions destroy value as opposed to creating it. That's never about price. Nobody has ever done a deal, or very rarely has done a deal and said, if I'd paid 5% less or 10% less, this would have been a good deal. For corporates, because of that synergies factor, it all comes down to good execution. If you execute well, you always underpaid. And if you execute badly, you always overpaid.
We're here today with Davina Kaile. She is a very senior partner at Pillsbury, Winthrop, Shaw, and Pittman, and she has guided companies through high-profile IPOs and M&A activity. over her long career. She is also the co-leader of the capital markets practice at Pillsbury, and it covers a wide range of sectors, including technology, e-commerce, life sciences, financial services, and retail. Some of the deals you might be familiar with include Every, First Dibs, and Coursera. Welcome, Davina. We're excited to talk about IPOs today. We usually ask our guests their take on high performance companies and what sets those companies apart. In the case of an IPO, most companies only go public once. Are there any behaviors or trends, anything else that you think defines a high performance IPO, a more successful IPO?
Go when you're ready and not before. So maybe you have pressure to take a company public maybe a year sooner than the management team or the board thinks it's ready. Trust your instincts. You'll get great advice from investment bankers, other constituencies, the board, and other members of management who've been through a process before. But I would tell a company, you go public when you're ready, not due to some external pressure or other motivation. I would also say from a high performance company or high performance IPO process, prepare in advance in terms of having a robust and rigorous process already in place across all aspects of the business, operational, sales, legal, external communications, financial reporting. Already have that in place. That goes hand in hand, obviously, having an experienced leadership team. It isn't strictly necessary that the team has to have gone through an IPO process before, but I think most people will recognize if you have an experienced leadership team, generally, some with PubCo experience, some with IPO experience, some with both, some with none, but people that have that skill set to execute on these types of deals, the ability to multitask and think ahead of things, all important. Being realistic about life as a public company. I feel a little bit bad. I think we've talked a lot about these burdens, regulatory costs, complication, time, but it really is such a transformative process in a company's life cycle. This is one of the things I live and breathe doing IPO transactions because there's something tremendously rewarding, even as an outside advisor, watching a company and their employees' reaction when they first see the ticker symbol in Times Square. It's just very fulfilling, and all the hard work that the company put in over all those years and the sacrifices that were made, it's just rewarding. I think as a last thought on high performance characteristics, I would say adhere to best practices, not just the minimum necessary to meet requirements. The easiest example is corporate governance. There's a lot of scrutiny on public companies from a corporate governance perspective, diversity, equity, and inclusion, ESG, all obviously SEC just issued climate change rules. I encourage companies, if you're going to be a public company and going to IPO, think about adhering to I will call them like the platinum standard expectations. Maybe the rule only requires this, but you'll see other companies going above and beyond, not just from a governance perspective, but from an operational perspective. Adhere to best practices, maybe less focus on just trying to do the bare minimum necessary to get by. I realize that too is sometimes easier said than done, depends on the company. But I would say in terms of your question about high performance in the context of IPOs, I think those would be the ones that come to mind initially for me.
Today, we're here with Manisha Shetty-Gulati. She's a healthcare executive and a former McKinsey partner who started her career in international development. Welcome, Manisha. Thank you for joining us. Given all of your experience, what do you think that high-performance companies do differently? And are there learnings that we can take away from them?
I'm learning more and more about this all the time. So this is a quest for all of us. I would say one important part is the obsession with the customer and what customer needs are and working backwards from there. Everyone says they're obsessed with the customer, but a lot of times we're also obsessed with our own products and technology and things that we're trying to sell. Being obsessed with the customer from a product, but also how they consume information is really important. The other part of that is how you reallocate your resources accordingly based on what you're learning. For big companies, there's a lot of research that if you make bold bets and you actually allocate resources towards them, you're more likely to succeed than if you have a small innovation team or a digital team on the side that's trying to do something, but it's all pet projects and then the pilots die off and nothing's actually changed. So how do you reallocate your resources and incentives accordingly? That's another really important piece for high-performing organizations. And then the last, which is always the most important, is the people element. So how do you have a working environment where everyone feels inspired by the mission and understands how they're contributing towards that? Especially with all the M&A and things going on, it's really hard to maintain a culture where people trust the leadership. Layoffs are happening now, and it's a harsh reality, but how do you restore trust? How do you continue to make sure that you have a high-performing culture that is driving results? It's harder when we're in a hybrid world, when people don't actually see each other and make the same meaningful connections. That's another area where people are trying to figure out, what does it look like to have meaningful culture and human connections at a company in a hybrid world like we're in right now. But I think that the high-performing companies are the ones that get that organization and people part right.
Thanks for joining us here at Good Revenue. If you liked what you heard, please leave us a review, follow the show, or share it with a friend. We're a news show, so it really helps other listeners find us. And if you have feedback, comments, or suggestions for episodes or guests, please reach out to us. You can find our information in the show notes.